Starbucks. Let's talk about it. You know we're gonna talk about it. Hey, hello, how are you? My name is Stefania. Welcome to my channel, and I am so happy that we found each other. If you have seen my face before on any platform or have watched even 5 seconds of any of my videos, then you probably have already gathered that I worked as a Starbucks barista for 4 years of my life. I say it in like every single video of mine. If you don't know me, now you know that. So we're all up to speed here. A few years ago, I posted a video of the reasons that I quit my second corporate store. We talked about the reason I quit my second store, but we never really talked about the reason that I quit Starbucks altogether, because I worked at 3 stores during my time as a barista. I think I historically have been less proud of the reason how I went about me saying I'm done being a Starbucks barista forever. My second store, when I quit that store, that was kind of like a lot of hoopla, a lot of drama. That was a good story to tell, okay? This story over here that we're gonna talk about today, I don't have any shame around it anymore. I have a feeling that what I'm gonna say is something that a lot of other baristas have probably experienced. I hope not, but I guess we're gonna find out. During my time as a barista, I worked at 3 different stores. My first store was a licensed store. It was inside of Target. My second corporate store was a standalone Starbucks in the town over from me, and eventually my third store and final store was one that was just outside of campus at my new university. And I say new university because as a freshman, I went to a different university and then I transferred to this one where this store was at. As you can imagine, some of the people that would come through the drive-thru and come into our store, they had some attitudes, but nothing I had never seen before. And if you can believe it or not, that wasn't the reason that I quit. I mean, it was like 40% of the reason. As I mentioned before, when I was a freshman, I ultimately made the decision to transfer university. So in the summer of 2019, I was in the process of doing so. This was the first time that I had ever lived alone. I was in a new state, new school. Also during that time and during that summer, I had a really nasty breakup. It was bad. Messy, 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 tomato, tomato, not a fun time in my life. We're not gonna get into the nitty-gritty details, but like, it just wasn't the best mental health period for myself. The thing is that I found consistency and normalcy. Starbucks was familiar to me. That was kind of my safe haven during this time, weirdly enough. Because at that point in my life, Starbucks was the only thing that I really knew and that I had been doing for like 3 years at that point. I started making friends with some of the baristas that I worked with. They were such sweet people. I went out with them, hung out with them a few times. Although there were a lot of sweet people I worked with, of course, there's always gonna be a few bad apples too. There was one manager in particular, and this is a really big part of the story, that was particularly micromanaging. And listen, when you're already mentally going through it, you do not need somebody like over your shoulder watching and criticizing everything you're doing every single moment of your shift. It was a lot. She was very nice, but it was very difficult to get along with her for those reasons. Okay, so let's fast forward through the summer of 2019. We're at like end of July, beginning of August now. There was one day that I remember that I had to take a placement test for this math class that I was trying to test into. It was business calculus, disgusting, okay? But I had to go take a placement test. This specific placement test was going to take place on a Tuesday. I remember that. I was starting school in like 3 weeks, so I had to take it on that Tuesday. Now, I communicated like 3 or 4 days prior, I mean, it was ample time. I communicated to my micromanager that I would be 30 minutes and only 30 minutes late to my shift. She said it was fine, don't worry about it. She'd communicated to our store manager and just come in when my placement test is over. So in my head, I'm like, great, we're good. Let's go bomb this placement test. It's like, let's go. When I returned to work on that Tuesday, 30 minutes late to my shift after taking the placement test, I was immediately greeted with a write-up from my store manager. So clearly my micromanager had not communicated it to my store manager, and I got written up for putting the team behind by 30 minutes. Even though I tried to explain the situation to my store manager, all he could see was the fact that I was late, and he wrote me up. He didn't care. I wasn't like clubbing on a Tuesday at 4 p.m. and that's the reason I was late to work. I was taking a placement test. After that shift, I moved on with my week. I just really tried to forget about it. Tried, keyword tried. But here's where things get a little spicy. That following weekend, that all of this kind of went down with my placement test, and I was already left kind of just having this bad taste in my mouth, and just, I was kind of on the verge of like, F this job, do I really need this job? But I was still holding on by a thread, but I was holding on. That following weekend, I regrettably found out something that I didn't know before that was like catastrophic and like shook my world yet again that summer. And I was just sad. I was just really, really sad, if we're gonna be transparent. It was like salt in the wound. Again, I'm not gonna go into the details, but it wasn't good. And I felt extremely betrayed, lied to, manipulated, just all those negative feelings. Now, I know a lot of people always say that when you work at Starbucks or I guess any job really, that you should check your personal life at the door. And while I do agree with that, I also want to point out the fact that sometimes it can be really hard to do that. So if you're someone who has experienced that or is currently experiencing that, just know that I have a lot of empathy for you. Just do your best. That's all anybody can ever ask of you. There was one day in the beginning of August that in particular I was having a really, really bad mental health day. Everything going on kind of just hit me like a truck. When you're having those really bad days where you physically cannot get out of bed, the last thing you want to do is like go get berated in the drive-thru by some Karen, again, driving an Acura. It's the last thing you want to do. I just felt particularly heavy on this day, and I had a 4-hour shift starting in a few hours. There was only 3 times over the course of the 4 years that I worked at Starbucks that I had called out. One of them was because my dog died, the other was because I had a family emergency, and then this third time that I'm about to tell you about. I had called my store and my micromanager had picked up, and I kind of leveled with her. I told her what was going on, kind of what was happening, and I was like, listen, I'm not gonna be able to come in tonight. I would really appreciate it if both of us can work together to find some coverage, because obviously don't want to leave them high and dry. Both her and I tried for the next 30 minutes calling around trying to find coverage, and pretty much nobody could come in. Nobody was available. My micromanager called me back, and eventually the guilt tripping kind of started of like, oh, like, you know, this isn't really supportive of you, like you're kind of screwing over your crew, blah 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 blah, like basically just trying to guilt trip me into coming in because we couldn't find anyone else to cover. I had been honest with her and told her that I just needed a mental break for that day. I was also working that summer 40 hours a week at Starbucks, so when you're dealing with a lot of stuff in your personal life and then like working at Starbucks for 40 hours a week, which if you know, you know, like it's a lot. Sometimes you need a break. I will never forget, my micromanager hung up, spoke on the phone with my store manager, and then after they had called me back. I will never forget the words that she said to me. She said to me that my store manager was wondering when I would not be sad enough to come into my shift that day. Maybe it wasn't what was said, rather how it was said, but regardless, great question. I have no idea when I'm not gonna be sad. After she said that to me, I was more frustrated than I was sad at that point. For the last 4 years of working at Starbucks, I had always heard that the company really put an emphasis on mental health, and you know, they gave their partners X amount of free therapy sessions every year, and blah 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 blah. And then when it finally always came down to one of their partners actually having some sort of like a mental health day, like it was always an issue. After that call had happened and we had hung up, I basically knew that my time at Starbucks was coming to a close. I knew that it was like, ooh, it's time. Now this is the part that I am not particularly proud of. How I quit Starbucks once and for all, you ask? I stopped showing up. I just stopped showing up. I am not proud of that. For my final 2 shifts, I no call, no showed, and I just didn't show up. And eventually they stopped talking to me. They stopped calling me. They knew that I wasn't coming back in. That was basically my way of quitting. That is officially how I walked away from Starbucks after 4 years. Now I'm at the point where I can reflect back and I just feel empathy for the person who I was. From this entire situation, the biggest thing that I've extracted from this, and this is something that I want to communicate and stress so heavily to all of you that are watching, is there is no job on earth that is worth sacrificing your mental health for. If there's a job that tells you or gives you the vibe that it's not okay to take a day for your own mental health, then that is not a job that you should be working in. Mental health is a very real thing, and at the end of the day, you are the only person really that has to deal with it on a day-to-day basis. So it's you that needs to take care of you. No one else is going to, for the most part. You know what I'm saying? For me, I was just so upset, feeling like I'm just a number here. I am just another green apron. Nobody actually really cares about me here. And out of frustration, sadness, anger, I walked away the way I did. And this is why I always say that wherever you're at, Starbucks, wherever, you don't need to be mean to people for no reason, especially food service workers. You never know what people are going through, so there's no reason to be mean to people just for showing up at their job. The last thing that I'm gonna say in this video, I give you permission, if nobody else has, to take a break. You need a breather for a moment, take a breather for a moment, take 2 moments, do whatever you need to do. I think there's a really weird stigma or like a negative connotation around sometimes taking care of yourself. And yes, sometimes taking care of yourself does affect other people, but sometimes it's kind of inevitable. Sometimes you really just need a day, a moment, an hour, whatever it might be. It's not weak to quit. It's not weak to realize that you need to take a breather. I think there's this negative connotation around like, oh, that's selfish. That's not selfish. At the end of the day, if being selfish makes it a little bit easier up here, do it. Starbucks is a great company to work for. We have talked about the reasons in depth that it's a great company, but beware. So that is the story of how, why, when, of why I quit. And I give myself grace. So that's my story. And thanks for letting me share it with you. See you next time.